My boss looked me in the eyes, and for a split second I thought he was going to congratulate me. He had this strange smile, the kind you give someone right before you deliver bad news. Then he slid an envelope across his mahogany desk and said, "Sarah, we're going in a different direction. This is your severance." I was 8 months pregnant. I remember the exact temperature of that moment. The office felt suddenly cold. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, I could see the city I loved, the same city where I thought I'd built something unshakable. My hands started shaking, but I kept them flat on my lap so he wouldn't see. I remember thinking, "Stay professional. Don't cry. Not here. Not now." But I need to rewind, because this story isn't about that moment. It's about everything that led to it and everything that came after. I started at Meridian Tech Solutions 8 years before that morning. I was 22 years old, fresh out of university, terrified I wouldn't be good enough. The company was smaller then, maybe 60 people, all crammed into a renovated warehouse in downtown Portland. Richard Chen, my boss, hired me as a junior account manager. He told me later that he saw something in me. A hunger, maybe, or just desperation. Either way, I got the job. Those first years were extraordinary. I worked 70-hour weeks without complaining. I learned everything: client management, financial projections, product strategy, team leadership. By my 26th birthday, I was managing 5 major accounts and leading a team of 4 people. By 28, I was one of the 3 people Richard trusted most in the entire company. The company had grown to 200 employees. We had moved to a glass building downtown. We had venture capital backing. We had ambitions. Richard had started taking me to board meetings. He would introduce me as his future leader. I believed him. I believed in the company. I believed in him. My colleagues respected me. The ones I mentored came back years later to thank me for teaching them how to think strategically. Clients requested me by name. One time, our biggest account, Westbrook Finance, almost left the company, and Richard asked me to handle it personally. I spent a month rebuilding that relationship from the ground up. Westbrook stayed. The company made $3 million from that contract alone. I was invincible, or at least I felt that way. Then I got married. Mike and I met in college. He's a teacher, elementary school, 4th grade, the kind of person who gets genuinely excited when a shy kid finally raises their hand in class. He's patient in ways I've never been patient. He's gentle. When he looked at me and asked if I wanted to have children, I said yes immediately. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about my career trajectory or my position at the company or whether it was the right time. I just knew I wanted to build a life with him, and I wanted to be a mother. When I found out I was pregnant, I was ecstatic. I remember sitting in the bathroom at our apartment, holding the positive test, crying happy tears. Mike came home from work that day, and I was waiting by the door with my hands behind my back. When I showed him the test, he actually got down on one knee, even though we were already married, and he said, "Let me do this right." He held that test like it was the most precious thing in the world. That's who Mike is. I didn't tell Richard immediately. I wanted to be sure everything was healthy. I had my first ultrasound at 12 weeks. The baby was perfect. A girl, my daughter, Emma. The next Monday, I told Richard. I went into his office around 9 in the morning. He was on a call, but he waved me in and finished the conversation quickly. I remember thinking that was a good sign, that he was giving me his time and attention. I sat down and I said, "Richard, I have some personal news. I'm pregnant. I'm very happy about it, and I wanted to tell you directly rather than have you hear it through the rumor mill." He smiled. It wasn't a real smile, I know that now, but I didn't know it then. He said, "That's wonderful, Sarah. Congratulations. This is wonderful news." But then he stood up and the meeting was over. I remember walking back to my desk thinking, okay, that went well. He was supportive. I was so naive. Over the next few weeks, things began to change in ways that were subtle enough that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. Richard stopped inviting me to strategy meetings. When I asked why, he said they were just operational updates, nothing that needed your input. But I had attended every single operational update for the past 3 years. Suddenly, I didn't need my input anymore. When I presented quarterly projections to the board, Richard barely acknowledged my work. He took the presentation deck that I'd spent 40 hours perfecting, presented it as his own analysis, and didn't mention my name once. I told myself not to be bitter, but the bitterness came anyway, creeping in like cold under a door. The HR manager, Jennifer Martinez, became distant. We used to have lunch together sometimes. Suddenly, she always had other plans. When I ran into her in the hallway one day, she gave me a tight smile and hurried away. I watched her go and felt something inside me start to twist. Then the comments started, small ones. A coworker asked if I was planning to come back after, with this tone that made it clear what he actually meant, that he didn't think I would. Another person said, "Pregnancy is so beautiful, but it's also such a huge adjustment for careers, isn't it?" I was 7 months pregnant. I was still managing 2 major accounts, still closing deals, still bringing revenue to the company. At 7.5 months, I was in a meeting with a potential new client, Threshold Logistics, a big account, millions of dollars if we won their business. I was pitching our services. I was tired. I was uncomfortable. My back ached in ways I hadn't anticipated pregnancy would make my back ache. But I was professional. I was sharp. I closed the deal. Richard took me out to celebrate, just the 2 of us. I remember thinking that maybe things were going to be okay. We went to this upscale restaurant he loved, the kind with white tablecloths and a sommelier who somehow remembers your preferences. About halfway through the meal, Richard asked about my maternity plans. How long was I thinking? 6 weeks, 3 months. I said I was planning on taking 4 months. That seemed reasonable to me. 4 months to bond with my daughter, then a gradual return to work. I thought I could do both. I thought I could be present for Emma and be present for my career. Richard set down his wine glass very slowly. He said, 4 months is a long time to be away from a high-pressure role, Sarah. Things change quickly in our industry. Clients forget. Momentum dies. I felt something cold run through me. I said, other people take parental leave all the time. It's protected. He nodded and took another sip of wine. He said, of course. We're not trying to prevent that. We just want to manage expectations. The market is unpredictable right now. We might need to restructure some roles while you're gone. I didn't say anything. I finished my dinner. I went home. I lay next to Mike and felt my daughter moving inside me, and I tried not to cry because I didn't want to worry him. The next month was a blur. I gave birth to Emma on a rainy Thursday in October. The labor lasted 16 hours. I remember being in that hospital room, exhausted beyond measure, and then suddenly this tiny human was placed on my chest, and I understood for the first time what it meant to love something more than myself. Mike was crying. I was crying. Emma was crying. Everything was messy and painful and perfect. I took 2 weeks off. I told myself I'd ease back into work remotely, check in on things, make sure nothing fell apart while I was bonding with my daughter. But when I logged into my work email on day 16, I found a meeting request. It was from Jennifer Martinez in HR. The subject line said important discussion. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning, not a video call, in person, at the office. I remember reading that email 3 times, hoping the meaning would change somehow. Mike asked if I was okay. I must have looked terrified. I went to the office the next morning. Emma was 3 weeks old. I was still bleeding. I was exhausted in a way that doesn't have words, but I went. Richard was sitting in the conference room with Jennifer. I sat down, and Richard started talking about restructuring, how the company needed to be more nimble, how his investors were pushing for cost reductions, how they'd made some difficult decisions. I remember noticing that he wouldn't make eye contact with me. He said, "We're letting you go, Sarah. As of today, the severance is 3 months' salary plus COBRA coverage. Jennifer has all the paperwork." I couldn't speak. My vision actually narrowed like I was looking at him through a tunnel. 3 months' salary. I had maternity medical bills that hadn't been processed yet. I had a 3-week-old daughter. I had a mortgage. I asked why. He gave me a reason that had nothing to do with performance or capability or anything real. He called it reorganization due to market conditions. But I knew, everyone in that room knew, the timing was too perfect. The coincidence was too precise. They had waited until I was vulnerable, until I was off the clock, until I was physically and emotionally depleted. Then they cut me loose. As I was leaving the office, James Park, a junior analyst I'd mentored when he first started at the company, caught me in the hallway. He looked pale. He said, "Sarah, I'm so sorry. This is messed up. This is really messed up." I remember putting my hand on his shoulder and telling him not to worry about it, even though I was the one falling apart. That evening, I sat in our living room while Mike held Emma, and I told him I'd been fired. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just held our daughter and held me, and we sat together in the quiet of our small apartment. The next 3 months were the hardest I've ever endured, and I've endured things. The severance ran out. The medical bills kept coming. I started applying for jobs while taking care of a newborn and dealing with postpartum depression. Something I didn't fully understand was happening until I was deep in it. I thought the darkness was normal. I thought everyone felt like their chest was filled with wet concrete. I went to interviews while my mother watched Emma. I put on professional clothes that didn't fit my postpartum body. I smiled through conversations where I could feel the mental math happening. She has a newborn. Will she even show up? I didn't get callbacks. Or I did, but then the jobs disappeared. One hearing manager actually asked me point blank about my maternity plans. I reported it. Nothing happened. The nights were brutal. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep even after Emma finally fell asleep. I'd scroll through my bank account on my phone, watching the number get smaller. I'd do the math over and over. How many months until everything runs out? 4, 3, 2. But here's what I didn't know then. I was being forged in that darkness. Every rejection made me more determined. Every sleepless night made me more resourceful. The despair was real, but so was something else, a core of steel I didn't know I had. Mike never stopped believing in me. When I told him I was applying for part-time freelance work instead of a full-time position, he said, "Whatever you need to do." He picked up extra tutoring sessions on weekends. We cut expenses. We survived. By the time Emma was 6 months old, I had 3 freelance clients. By the time she was 9 months old, I had 5. They were smaller accounts than what I'd managed at Meridian, but they were mine. I built them from nothing. I didn't have a boss looking over my shoulder, ready to fire me for becoming a mother. I had clients who respected my work and paid me fairly for it. By the time Emma was a year old, I was stable again. Not wealthy, but stable. I had built something myself. My best friend Maggie, who worked in HR consulting, called me around that time. She said she had a client, a startup called Cascade Consulting, that was looking for a director of client relations. She thought of me immediately. She said, "Sarah, I think this could be it. I think this could be exactly what you need." I was terrified to even apply, but I did. The interview process took 3 weeks. I met with the founders, Victoria Chen and Marcus Williams, no relation to Richard, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt seen. I felt valued. They asked me about my experience with maternity leave, and instead of seeing it as a liability, they asked how they could structure their company so it wouldn't be a crisis. I started at Cascade Consulting when Emma was 14 months old. The salary was less than what I made at Meridian, but the flexibility was unlimited. I could work from home. I could bring Emma to the office for a few hours if I needed to. There was a nursing room that wasn't a bathroom stall. There was maternity protection written into the employee handbook before the company was even a year old. And I thrived. I built Cascade's client base from scratch. Within 2 years, we had landed major accounts. I was mentoring junior employees, many of them women navigating career and motherhood. I was successful in a way that felt authentic and aligned with who I actually was. Emma was thriving too. She was walking, talking, developing into this hilarious little person with Mike's patience and my stubbornness. I thought about Richard Chen sometimes, usually when I heard negative news about Meridian Tech, and there was negative news, a lot of it. Apparently after I left, the company lost direction. That Westbrook Finance account that I'd rebuilt from the ground up, the one that generated $3 million in revenue, pulled out and went to a competitor 2 years after I was fired. Threshold Logistics, the company I closed when I was 8 months pregnant, didn't renew their contract. Without me there to maintain the relationships and adapt to client needs, the business simply fell apart. Richard, from what I heard, had become increasingly erratic. He started making decisions that didn't make sense. He fired several other women around the same time he fired me. James Park told me later, through a quiet coffee meeting where he looked over his shoulder the entire time, that he'd documented everything. He was planning to file a formal complaint. He said there were probably 10 women who'd been fired for pregnancy-related reasons in the past 18 months. I told James he was brave. He told me I was brave for surviving it. 2 years after I walked out of Meridian's office for the last time, I was in Cascade's downtown Portland location, preparing for a presentation to a potential new client. I was 3 months away from becoming a partner in the company. My career was no longer something I was fighting for. It was something I was building. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. But something made me pick up. It was Richard Chen. He said my name, just Sarah, and there was something in his voice that made my chest tighten. He sounded smaller than I remembered, older, defeated. He said, "I was hoping we could meet. There's something I need to talk to you about, something that's time-sensitive." Every instinct I had told me to hang up, to tell him that I had nothing to say to him, that he'd had his chance to treat me with respect, and he'd failed, that he was the last person I wanted to see. But I was curious, and I was also something else, secure enough that I didn't feel threatened by him anymore. I suggested a coffee shop, neutral territory, during my lunch break. He agreed immediately. He said he could be there in 30 minutes. I sat across from him in a corner booth at a coffee place near Pioneer Courthouse Square, and I barely recognized him. He was gray in a way he hadn't been before. Not just his hair, though that was grayer too, but his skin, his energy, like the color had been drained out of him. He ordered black coffee and didn't touch it. He said, "I owe you an apology. I've owed you an apology for 2 years, and I've rehearsed it 1,000 times, and I still don't have the words. I treated you terribly, Sarah. I treated you like you were a liability instead of an asset, and I did it because I was afraid." I didn't say anything. I stirred my latte slowly and waited. He continued, "Meridian is falling apart. We lost our major accounts. We lost our direction. We went from being a growth company to a company that's just trying to survive quarter to quarter. My investors are pushing for a sale. We're probably going to be acquired by a much larger firm for a fraction of what we should be worth. And it's because of decisions I made after you left. Decisions based on fear and ego, and I made a huge mistake letting you go." I felt something unexpected, not satisfaction, not revenge, something more complicated, a mix of vindication and sadness. He said, "I'm asking if you would come back. I'm not going to lie to you. The salary would be lower than what you were making before. The company's financial situation is complicated, but I'm asking if you would help me try to save it. I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm asking anyway." I picked up my coffee cup. I took a slow sip. I watched him sitting across from me, waiting for my answer, and I realized something profound. I had all the power in this moment. Not because I was his employee anymore, but because I wasn't. I was independent. I was successful. I had options. And because I had options, I could choose. I said, "I need to think about it." He nodded. He looked like he expected that. I told him I'd contact him within a week. That night, Mike and I talked about it after Emma went to bed. He asked me what I wanted to do. I said I didn't know. He said, "What would Emma want you to do?" That was the question that cracked it open for me. What would I want Emma to do if she were in my position, facing a person who had hurt her, facing the opportunity to either seek revenge or seek something better? I would want her to be smart about it. I would want her to protect her own interests. But I would also want her to be someone who could see the nuance in situations, someone who could be strong enough to forgive without forgetting, someone who could choose justice over revenge. I called Richard back. I told him I would help him, but only on certain conditions. I needed partnership equity, 5% of the company, vested over 3 years. I needed to be part of the decision-making structure, not subordinate to him. And most importantly, I needed the company to establish real maternity and paternity protections. Not the bare minimum required by law, real protections. flexible scheduling, career pathway guarantees for people taking parental leave. These things had to be written into the company culture and contracts before I would even consider it. He asked if those were my final terms. I said yes. He said, okay. I quit Cascade Consulting 2 weeks later. Victoria and Marcus understood. They celebrated my promotion in a way that was genuine. They hugged me. They meant it when they said they'd miss me. I started at Meridian Tech on a Monday morning. I walked into that building that had once felt like home and then like a war zone, and I walked in as someone transformed. I'd been fired. I'd fallen. And I'd built myself back up. No one could ever take that from me. The turnaround wasn't fast or magical. It took 8 months of brutal work. I rebuilt relationships with clients, including Westbrook Finance. The account manager who'd inherited that relationship, a good person named Denise, was relieved to have me come in and help. Together, Denise and I not only won back Westbrook, we expanded their contract. They added 2 new product lines. I restructured the client relations team to operate more autonomously. I mentored every junior employee, making sure they felt valued and secure. I implemented the new parental leave policies that Richard had surprisingly supported without much argument. We started a mentorship program for mothers returning to work. We created a nursing room that was actually a real room with a comfortable chair, a mini fridge, and privacy. And slowly, Meridian started growing again. Richard was a different person than he'd been before. I don't mean he became a saint. He was still ambitious. He still made mistakes. But something had shifted in him. He'd experienced failure and humiliation, and it had broken open something that had been hardened before. He actually listened to people now. He actually valued perspectives that weren't his own. One day, about 6 months into my return, he asked me to grab coffee. Not as a boss and an employee, but almost like, I don't know, people who'd been through a war together. We sat in the same coffee shop where he'd apologized to me, and he said, I've been reading a lot of studies about leadership and company culture, and I realized something. The companies that succeed aren't the ones run by people like I was, people who see employees as resources to exploit. The ones that succeed are run by people who see employees as human beings. You always knew that, Sarah. Even when it cost you, you knew that. I said, I learned it in a hospital room holding my 3-week-old daughter while getting fired by text, basically. So yeah, I learned it well. He winced at that. I don't think he was trying to minimize my experience. I think he was just remembering what he'd done. I said, the good news is that you learned it too, and now you have a chance to do something with that knowledge. Meridian Tech was acquired 18 months after I returned, but not in the desperate, fire sale way Richard had feared. We were acquired by a larger firm for a strong price, and the deal included strategic oversight provisions that meant Meridian maintained its autonomy and culture. The parental leave policies remained. The mentorship program remained. The human-centered approach to business remained. And I became a partner, not just in Meridian, but eventually in the larger firm as well. But here's what I want you to understand, because this is the only thing that actually matters. The ending isn't about my career success. The ending isn't about proving Richard wrong or being vindicated in the eyes of people who doubted me. The ending is about something much simpler and much more powerful. 2 months ago, I got a message from James Park. He's a director now at a different company. He wrote to me and said that he finally filed that formal complaint about the discrimination at Meridian. He said he'd waited years because he was afraid, but he felt braver now. He said he'd talked to 8 other women who'd been fired around the time I was, and they were all willing to participate in an investigation. He said, none of this would have happened if you hadn't survived, if you hadn't succeeded. We all watched you come back, and it gave us permission to believe that we could too. That's when I understood something about forgiveness and justice and redemption that I don't think I would have understood if I'd sought revenge. Revenge would have closed a door. Forgiveness opened something else, the possibility of systemic change, of other women being protected, of a culture actually being transformed from the inside. I'm still a mentor. I mentor young women navigating early career and motherhood. I mentored my daughter's pediatrician when she was considering stepping back from medicine to focus on family. I mentor fathers taking parental leave, helping them navigate the guilt and cultural pressure that tells them they should prioritize work over presence. And I tell them all the same thing. Your value is not determined by your productivity. Your worth does not increase or decrease based on your career trajectory. You are not a liability for being human. You are not a burden for having needs. And anyone who treats you that way doesn't deserve to hold your future in their hands. Emma is 4 years old now. She'll start kindergarten in a few months. Mike and I are planning to have another child, and this time we'll do it without fear. I have partners who support me. I have systems in place. I have built my own throne, so to speak, and nobody gets to knock me off it. But maybe the best part of this entire story is something that happened last week. I was in a meeting with Richard, discussing Q3 projections, and a junior employee, a young woman named Sophia who's 8 months pregnant, knocked on the door. She looked nervous. She said she needed to tell leadership something. Richard invited her in. He said, "Please, whatever you need." Sophia said she was nervous about telling people she was pregnant because she'd heard stories about what happened to me, about what happened before the new policies were in place. She said she'd been ready to hide it, to wait until she was showing, to keep it quiet. But she decided to trust the company. She told us she was expecting twins. Richard actually got tears in his eyes. He said, "Sophia, this is the best news. We're going to support you completely. After your leave, we have so much flexibility. You can work from home. You can restructure your schedule. We will figure this out together." And he meant it. As I watched that interaction, I realized that the person who fired me had genuinely transformed. Not perfectly, not without still carrying the weight of what he'd done, but genuinely. And I had chosen to be part of that transformation instead of destroying him. That choice, the choice to rebuild instead of to burn down, that's the only real ending to this story. That's the thing that kept me watching when I played back my own life. That's the moment that made everything that came before feel like it meant something. You're going to face moments in your life when someone wrongs you. You're going to have choices. You can choose revenge, which feels powerful for a moment and then poisons everything. Or you can choose something harder. You can choose to survive, to thrive, to become so strong and so secure in yourself that you can offer someone the possibility of redemption without losing yourself. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing any human being can do.